The year is 1944. Europe, a continent in convulsions, consumed by the ravenous maw of war. In its grasp, a young man, barely more than a boy at 22, bore the heavy mantle of conflict. Lieutenant Felix Hartman, a name that would echo through history as a whisper, was not forged for battle. He was a quiet soul from a tranquil Bavarian village, his hands more accustomed to the delicate dance of radio repair in his father's workshop than the brutal embrace of combat. Yet the war, in its insatiable hunger, demanded pilots, and Felix possessed a rare alchemy of unwavering calm and innate spatial brilliance. By 44, the sky was his domain, specifically the treacherous expanse above the Alps. His missions? Reconnaissance, a silent sentinel capturing Allied movements, charting the capricious moods of the weather, a vital intelligence that could tip the scales of entire operations. October 9th, 1944. The air was crisp, thin. Felix climbed into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, a machine he knew intimately, for what should have been a mundane flight. Orders were starkly simple. Ascend from Innsbruck, traverse the formidable Brenner Pass, meticulously document rail activity, and return before twilight claimed the peaks. He was heard to jest with the mechanics, a fleeting smile on his lips about being back in time for hot soup. The mountains, to him, were not a source of fear, but a force to be respected, their temperaments understood with an almost intimate knowledge. At 10:32 a.m., his voice, steady and unhurried, cut through the static to ground control. Visibility decreasing, adjusting altitude, he reported. A routine update, nothing to suggest the precipice he was unknowingly approaching. Minutes later, a faint, fractured transmission, a ghost of a sound, wrestled with the static, unfinished, interrupted, swallowed by the storm that was gathering its dark might above the unforgiving peaks. Then, silence, an absolute void where his voice had been. No further radio contact, no desperate mayday, no telltale debris scattered along his designated flight path. The crude tracking technology of the era was powerless to pinpoint his exact location, leaving a gaping wound of uncertainty. Still, they searched, a desperate, tireless ballet against an indifferent landscape. Infantry patrols scoured the labyrinthine valleys. Elite Alpine units meticulously combed the jagged ridgelines. Villagers, their faces etched with grim understanding, were questioned. But the Alps, vast and silent, offered nothing back. No trace of the young pilot, no sign of his metallic bird. The mountains had absorbed him, drawing him into their frigid embrace, and steadfastly refused to relinquish their hold. As the weeks bled into months, as the relentless tide of war turned and front lines crumbled, Felix's name was quietly, tragically added to the ever-growing roll call of the missing. His mother, Marta, held his letters like sacred relics hidden beneath her bed, a tangible link to a son who was now only a memory. His father, Wilhelm, clung to a desperate hope, telling neighbors that one day, when the snows receded, the truth would emerge. But the Alps remained a silent, unyielding monument, and the young pilot, a ghost in the cold air, faded into the annals of history, a collection of unanswered questions. Felix's final mission, initially conceived as straightforward, was destined to become a deadly dance with the mountains. Even as he ascended, the weather, a capricious beast, had begun to turn. Wisps of thin cloud like skeletal fingers curled around the jagged peaks, silent harbingers of doom. Reports from nearby stations painted a grim picture. Unpredictable winds, sudden violent downdrafts, and a fog so dense it could swallow an aircraft whole. Yet reconnaissance, in the unforgiving theater of war, could not wait. The Italian front, starved for supplies, desperately needed updated intelligence on Allied convoys snaking their way across the perilous mountain rail lines.
Felix, a master of his craft, flew a precise course from north to south, coaxing his Messerschmitt through narrow, unforgiving valleys where even seasoned pilots hesitated, their instincts screaming caution. Initially, the flight unfolded with textbook precision, skies clear, altitude stable, instruments delivering unwavering readings. But the Alps, renowned for their sudden, ferocious storms, proved their reputation. Within minutes, the weather unleashed its fury. Visibility plummeted to near zero. A monstrous wind slammed against his wings, threatening to tear them from the fuselage. The temperature, a silent assassin, dropped so rapidly that the edges of his cockpit canopy frosted over, blurring the already indistinct world outside. Later analysis would suggest the formation of a violent pressure system directly above the Brenner Pass that morning, an atmospheric trap, a vortex of chaos capable of disorienting even the most experienced aviator. But the weather, formidable as it was not Felix's sole adversary. Allied P-47 Thunderbolts had been sighted earlier, their formidable presence patrolling deep within German-held airspace. Some pilots, their memories perhaps colored by the storm's intensity, swore they detected the distant thrum of enemy engines during Felix's last radio check. Others, equally adamant, insisted the skies were clear of hostile fighters. To this day, the truth remains shrouded in the mists of conjecture. In those agonizing final minutes, Felix, a man fighting for his life, attempted to climb above the tempest, but the updrafts, like giant unseen hands, thrust him back. He then plunged lower, a desperate gambit to hug the valley floor, but his instruments, beleaguered by the electromagnetic fury, began to glitch. Magnetic interference? Battle damage from a phantom encounter? No one could definitively say. Witnesses in a remote Italian hamlet, their voices hushed with the passage of time, claimed to have heard an aircraft sputtering overhead, followed by a muffled boom, swallowed somewhere high in the swirling clouds. Others, dismissing it as mere mountain thunder, quickly forgot. Theories multiplied, each a desperate attempt to grasp at understanding. Did Felix misjudge his altitude in the blinding whiteout? Was he mercilessly shot down by Allied guns, a silent victim of an unrecorded skirmish? Did a catastrophic mechanical failure send him spiraling into the unforgiving embrace of the glacier fields? The war, a relentless devourer of lives and answers, ended before any proper investigation could commence. His final flight became a riddle buried beneath 40 feet of solid ice, a mystery that would lie undisturbed for 81 years, patiently waiting for the world to catch up to the storm that had consumed him whole. Back in the quiet Bavarian village, the news of Felix's disappearance arrived not with a solemn knock, but with a thin, unsettling envelope, starkly marked, "Vermisst," missing. His mother, Marta Hartman, her heart a raw wound, read the letter once, then again, her fingers meticulously folding it back to its pristine state, as if untouched. She simply refused to believe. "Mothers know when a child is gone," she declared, an unwavering certainty in her voice, for she felt no such chilling silence in her very bones. His room remained a frozen tableau of his last presence. The model airplane, a fragile testament to childhood dreams, still dangled from a fishing line above his bed. His flight manual, a compendium of soaring ambitions, sat neatly stacked on his desk. His favorite wool coat, a familiar comfort, hung by the door, perpetually ready for the encroaching winter. Every evening, a solitary candle flickered beside his photograph, a defiant beacon in the encroaching darkness. Every morning, she opened his window, allowing the crisp, cold mountain air to sweep through, as if her son might materialize at the front gate at any moment. His father, Wilhelm, a man consumed by an unyielding need for truth, penned letter after letter to military offices in Berlin, Innsbruck, and Munich. Each missive was a desperate plea for updates, coordinates, crash reports, anything that could anchor their son's story to a tangible reality. Most replies were polite apologies, hollow echoes of bureaucracy. Some were curt dismissals, devoid of empathy. Others simply vanished, swallowed by the chaotic disarray of a collapsing regime. Yet Wilhelm persisted, his pen a relentless instrument against the tide of indifference. He craved the truth with an intensity akin to the need for sustenance itself. Over the ensuing years, the Hartman family clung to rumors like desperate lifelines.
A farmer in Tyrol, his face weathered by sun and wind, swore he had witnessed a German aircraft flame out above a distant ridge. A shepherd, his gaze accustomed to the vastness of the peaks, insisted he heard the groaning of metal on a glacier late one night. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of a wreck, buried so deep beneath the snow that no one could ever hope to reach it. Someone even claimed to have found a tail fin, half buried in ice, only for the spring melt to reveal nothing but barren rock. Each rumor, a cruel cycle of hope, followed by the crushing weight of disappointment, leaving behind a deeper, more profound ache. When the war finally limped to its agonizing conclusion, missing soldiers, spectral figures emerging from the shadows began to trickle home, one by one. Thin, weary men, returning like ghosts into the blinding sunlight. Each time news reached the Hartmans, Marta, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation, rushed to the station, convinced that Felix would be among them. He never was. Yet her gaze remained fixed on the winding road, her ears strained for the familiar crunch of his footsteps on the gravel path. Decades unspooled. Grandchildren were born. Neighbors passed away. The world, in its relentless march, moved forward, but the Hartman family remained stubbornly anchored to a single haunting question. Where had the mountains taken their son? And why did the Alps guard their secrets with such an unyielding ferocity? In the tender, fragile years immediately following the war, as Europe slowly, painstakingly began to mend its shattered self, small, dedicated military recovery teams continued their relentless search for missing aircraft. Felix's case, though already receding into the labyrinthine depths of official files, continued to draw a handful of resolute pilots and officers, individuals who simply refused to let it go. They crisscrossed rocky passes, guided by incomplete, hand-scribbled maps, meticulously studying flight logs penned in faded pencil, and earnestly interviewing anyone who claimed to have seen or heard anything unusual in the autumn of 1944. Every rumored crash site became a destination, a steep ravine perpetually shadowed by towering cliffs, a vast glacier field whispered to swallow entire huts in the grip of winter, a high-altitude lake where locals reported strange, unsettling reflections beneath its frigid surface. But the Alps, majestic and indifferent, met their efforts with an unyielding stoicism. Snowfields shifted with an almost sentient malice, erasing footprints within minutes. Avalanches, sudden and terrifying, sealed off valleys that had been open mere weeks before. Fog, an insidious, creeping entity, poured into canyons without warning, swallowing entire search teams in a matter of seconds. Even seasoned mountaineers, their faces etched with the harsh realities of the peaks, admitted the terrain felt cursed, breathtakingly beautiful, yet utterly unforgiving. By 1947, a small Luftwaffe recovery squad, utilizing surplus Allied planes, attempted an aerial search. They meticulously retraced Felix's probable route from Innsbruck to the Brenner Pass, their eyes scanning every ridgeline for even the faintest metallic glint. Nothing. Not even a scrap of aluminum, a ghostly echo of the aircraft. The mountain winds, an untamed force, proved so violent that the pilots aborted the mission early, convinced that any wreckage was either buried deep beneath layers of ice or had been pulverized against the unforgiving rock. Another expedition, in 1951, this one guided by the intimate knowledge of local mountaineers, pushed even deeper into remote, uncharted territory, pursuing a theory that Felix might have been driven westward by the tempest. The team returned after a mere 3 days, their faces pale, visibly shaken by harrowing rockfalls and a near-fatal crevice collapse. Their official report, a cold, clinical document, stated that the terrain was unsuitable for safe passage and unlikely to yield conclusive findings. Unofficially, their hushed whispers confessed a profound, visceral terror of the mountains themselves. As Europe pivoted into the tense anxieties of the Cold War, priorities shifted. Military budgets, once seemingly limitless, tightened their belts. Records were neatly boxed up, relegated to dusty archives. Missing pilots, Felix among them, became mere footnotes in a war that everyone, in their collective exhaustion, desperately yearned to forget. In 1957, the case was formally closed, stamped with a single chilling line that felt like a profound betrayal. Unsolved wartime loss. No further action recommended. The mountains, in their majestic indifference, maintained their resolute silence. The world stopped searching. And somewhere high in the desolate Alps, beneath decades of snow and unforgiving stone, the truth waited, undisturbed, unseen, yet unwilling to remain hidden forever. As the decades inexorably rolled on and the fading echoes of war receded into distant memory, the Alps, in their majestic silence, continued to offer subtle, unsettling hints, just enough to stir old ghosts, yet never quite enough to lay them to rest. Shepherds, tending their flocks high above the tree line, spoke in hushed tones of metallic flashes on distant cliffs, brief, tantalizing glints of sunlight striking something unnatural, something out of place, before vanishing again behind the ever-shifting clouds. Some dismissed them as mere tricks of the light, illusions conjured by the vast reflective expanse of ice and rock. Others, however, swore they had seen the unmistakable reflection of a curved fuselage, half buried in the unforgiving stone. Stories, like cherished heirlooms, passed down through generations of mountain families. A grizzled hunter claimed he once spotted the tip of a wing jutting from a glacier, only to watch, horrified, as an avalanche swallowed it moments later, erasing its fleeting presence. A pair of hikers, their voices tinged with awe and fear, insisted they had heard a hollow rumble beneath their feet, as if something vast and metallic was shifting deep within the ancient ice. Rumors, like tendrils of mist, grew stranger and more elaborate with the passage of time. Old men in smoky mountain taverns spoke of an iron bird trapped beneath frozen layers, its pilot still seated inside, perfectly preserved, a macabre snapshot of the very day he had vanished. Children, emboldened by youthful bravado, dared each other to climb into forbidden valleys where, they whispered, the wind carried faint spectral echoes of an engine that had last roared to life during the war. Tourists, their minds filled with the mundane realities of their lives, heard these tales and dismissed them with a laugh, chalking them up to the rich tapestry of folklore that thrives in such remote, wild places. But the locals, their lives intrinsically woven into the fabric of the mountains, knew better. They had witnessed the sudden, violent storms that descended without warning, felt the very earth tremble when ancient ice cracked open with a sound like thunder. Some, their eyes reflecting the deep wisdom of the mountains, truly believed there was a plane entombed somewhere in the high peaks, a secret the Alps were simply not yet ready to surrender. Every so often, a mountaineering team would return from the icy wilderness, their voices filled with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, claiming to have found twisted metal on a scree slope or fragments of painted steel half buried in meltwater. But searchers, their hopes renewed, arrived the following season, the evidence was invariably gone, once again hidden by fresh snowfall or swallowed by treacherous rock slides. By the 1980s, the legend had crystallized into something almost sacred, a downed Luftwaffe aircraft, a ghost of the war, frozen in time, patiently waiting for the opportune moment or the right melt to reveal itself. People spoke of it in hushed tones, half believing, half doubting, but always, invariably, returning to the same haunting question. If the mountains had truly swallowed a plane whole, how long would it be until they decided to let it go? No one, not even the most ardent believer, expected the answer to arrive more than 80 years after Felix Hartman had vanished into the heart of the storm. The summer of 2025 was a season of unprecedented heat, a searing anomaly that scorched the region, hotter than any on record. Glaciers, ancient and seemingly immutable, began to shrink at an alarming, almost terrifying rate, exposing ridges and crevasses that had not seen the light of day in centuries. Restrictions were hastily put in place, desperate measures to keep hikers away from the newly exposed, dangerously unstable zones. But curiosity, a primal human urge, rarely adheres to rules. On August 14th, a 41-year-old mountaineer named Jonas Keller, his spirit drawn by an inexplicable pull, veered off an approved trail. His gaze was fixed on an unfamiliar opening in the ice, a narrow path carved by the relentless flow of meltwater down the steep slope. Jonas wasn't actively searching for anything specific. He was simply exploring, reveling in the rare warmth at such a high altitude. But as he painstakingly climbed along the thinning glacier wall, something arrested his attention. A shape, hard, angular, terribly out of place in a world defined by the organic chaos of stone and ice.
At first, he rationalized it as modern debris, perhaps from a recent helicopter rescue or a lost piece of mountaineering equipment. But the closer he cautiously approached, the more unsettling, the more anachronistic the object became. A sheet of metal, its edges worn smooth by decades of crushing pressure, protruded from the deep blue ice. Jonas, his heart beginning to quicken, brushed away the frost with his gloved hand and froze. Beneath the ice, a faded, chipped, yet utterly unmistakable paint scheme. A black cross, starkly outlined in white, the Balkenkreuz, the dreaded insignia of the Luftwaffe. His stomach lurched, a cold, sickening drop. This was not modern. This was not even recent. This was history, the kind of history people whispered about yet never truly believed could be real. Jonas stumbled backward, his breath catching in ragged gasps in the thin air. Embedded in the ice, he could now discern more: a shattered section of a wing, a broken cockpit canopy, and, most chillingly of all, the faint spectral silhouette of a cockpit frame. He scrambled back down the ridge, slipping on treacherous loose gravel, a desperate urgency propelling him to find cell service. When he finally reached the authorities, his voice trembled, raw with awe and terror, as he recounted what he had seen. Within hours, the area was a hive of activity, sealed off from the curious world. Helicopters, their rotors beating a rhythmic tattoo against the mountain air, circled overhead. Experts, glaciologists, military historians, high-altitude rescue specialists were flown in, converging on the forbidden slope. And in that electric instant, the legend ceased to be a rumor. For the first time in 81 years, the mountains had grudgingly released their secret. Felix Hartman's aircraft had been found. Within a mere 48 hours of Jonas Keller's astonishing report, a highly specialized alpine recovery team had been meticulously assembled. Glaciologists, their faces etched with the wisdom of the ice, military historians, their minds vast archives of conflict, and high-altitude rescue experts, their bodies honed by years of battling the elements, all converged on the now forbidden slope. The climb itself was brutal, a relentless assault on mind and body. The unprecedented heat wave had destabilized entire sections of ancient ice, transforming the once solid glacier into a treacherous maze of slush pits and shifting crevasses. Every single footstep had to be meticulously tested, every rope doubly secured, a testament to the unforgiving nature of the terrain. Even the most seasoned climbers, their lives dedicated to conquering the peaks, admitted they had never witnessed the Alps in such a dangerous, unpredictable mood. After 6 grueling hours of relentless ascent, the team finally reached the coordinates Jonas had so precisely provided. What awaited them was a sight both breathtaking and profoundly chilling. The broken, twisted wing of a World War II fighter aircraft jutted at a defiant, unnatural angle from a vertical wall of ice, frozen in place like an ancient fossil. Meltwater, a constant, mournful tear, dripped steadily across its riveted seams. The Balkenkreuz, though faint and weathered, was unmistakably there, a stark reminder of a forgotten conflict. As the team painstakingly cleared away loose ice and accumulated frost, the full, awe-inspiring scope of the discovery began to emerge into chilling clarity. The aircraft hadn't simply crashed, it had been swallowed whole. The Messerschmitt lay lodged deep inside a narrow crevasse, its metallic form compressed and contorted between 2 massive, unyielding granite slabs. Most of the fuselage remained remarkably intact, twisted and battered, yet still eerily recognizable.
The engine block, a silent, frozen heart, sat half-buried in the ice, its metal warped by the colossal force of the impact. A single propeller blade, snapped clean off, was grotesquely wedged several meters higher, a macabre spear driven deep into the glacier wall. Then came the moment, a collective gasp of profound realization that shook even the most stoic, hardened members of the crew to their core. Near the lower section of the cockpit, crushed and folded like a fragile piece of paper under the unimaginable weight of the glacier, a boot protruded from the mangled wreckage. Its leather, cracked and frozen stiff, bore stitching that was almost miraculously preserved. At first, the fleeting thought of modern debris, perhaps from another ill-fated hiker, but as they cleared away more ice, the horrifying truth became unmistakably visible. The boot was still strapped to a rusted rudder pedal. A profound, echoing silence descended upon the team, a heavy cloak woven from awe, sorrow, and the crushing weight of history. No one spoke. No one had to. After 81 long, unforgiving years, the mountain had not merely revealed a wreck, it had revealed the last frozen moment of the young pilot who had vanished so utterly into the storm. Recovery protocols shifted instantly, a rapid, somber transition. The site, once a desolate wilderness, became a forensic zone. Tents were erected with solemn efficiency, specialized tools laid out with meticulous care, and the delicate, painstaking process of extracting the cockpit remains began, an operation designed to preserve what little chronological narrative the ice had so miraculously maintained. Word, like wildfire across dry brush, spread with astonishing speed. Reporters, a hungry swarm, descended upon the base camp. Descendants of other missing soldiers, their hopes rekindled from dormant embers, contacted local authorities. For the first time in 1944, the mystery of Felix Hartman was no longer a story whispered in hushed tones, a fading rumor or a spectral ghost haunting the peaks. It was something solid, tangible, and heartbreakingly real. The mountains had finally whispered the truth, and the world, holding its breath, was listening.
By the time the mangled wreckage of the Messerschmitt was carefully airlifted to a specialized alpine research facility, anticipation had reached a fever pitch, an almost palpable electricity in the air. Historians, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery, engineers, their minds dissecting the mechanics of disaster, and military archivists, guardians of forgotten pasts, crowded into the hangar. Each individual was consumed by a desperate urgency to examine the aircraft that had lain entombed for more than 8 decades. Under the harsh glare of floodlights, the Messerschmitt presented a paradoxical image, both ancient and strangely untouched, a relic frozen in a moment, defying the relentless march of time itself. Experts, moving with meticulous precision, catalogued every fragment: the bent propeller hub, a testament to violent impact; the crushed oil cooler, its intricate fins a testament to its former function; the shattered canopy frame, clouded with the patina of age. But it was the fuselage number that held the most profound significance, the key everyone had been so desperately waiting for. Etched faintly near the tail section, almost erased by years of unimaginable compression, were the serial markings. A historian, his gloved fingers tracing the digits with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts, meticulously brushed away the last vestiges of frost until the numbers emerged with chilling clarity. Werk number 146229. It was an exact, irrefutable match. The very aircraft Felix Hartman had piloted on the day he vanished. The confirmation sent a ripple of profound emotion through the room, a collective shiver of awe and sorrow. Archivists, their hands trembling slightly, opened long sealed boxes of wartime documents, brittle reconnaissance logs, faded old telegraphs, terse field reports. All the paperwork that had once coldly declared Felix missing without trace was now dusted off and meticulously re-examined,
each word imbued with newfound weight. The case that had been frigidly cold for generations was in that instant suddenly, vividly alive again. Forensic experts painstakingly examined fabric remnants, confirming they were indeed Luftwaffe-issued gear. Metal fatigue patterns, silent witnesses to the aircraft's final moments, strongly indicated that the engine had suffered catastrophic failure mid-flight, most likely triggered by either fierce enemy fire or the extreme violent pressure changes within the raging storm. They recovered part of a flight map, miraculously sealed behind the instrument panel, its edges stiff with frost, but the ink still startlingly visible. His planned route, a meticulous line drawn across the treacherous peaks, matched his orders exactly. Cross Brenner Pass, circle back, return before dusk. He had done everything right. The most haunting, heartbreaking discovery emerged from inside a small, unassuming compartment near the cockpit. A small personal effects pouch, standard military issue, its contents astonishingly preserved by the relentless embrace of the ice. Inside, nestled among the remnants of a vanished life, were 2 folded letters, the ink blurred by time and moisture, yet still hauntingly readable. One was addressed to his mother, the other to his father. As analysts, their voices hushed, translated the prejudicial pages, a profound silence fell over the entire team. These were not military documents. They were goodbyes, pre-written days before his final fateful flight, in case he did not return. Felix had known the risks. He had felt them, a cold, heavy weight pressing against his young chest. Now, at long last, his voice, a silent echo from the past, had been returned to the world. With the aircraft unequivocally identified, the disappearance of Lieutenant Felix Hartman was no longer an unsolved wartime mystery. It was a story finally stepping out of the cold, ready to be told, an 81-year-old narrative emerging from beneath the relentless ice. As the investigation deepened, what began as a straightforward recovery quickly twisted into something far more complex. Under layers of ice, rust, and crushed aluminum, the Messerschmitt held secrets the war had never recorded, secrets that rewrote Felix's final mission. The first clue came from the fuselage. When technicians carefully peeled away distorted panels, they found a distinct puncture pattern. Small, perfectly rounded perforations cutting clean through both sides of the aircraft. Not shrapnel, not debris, bullet holes, and not German caliber. These were from Allied 5.0 caliber rounds, the kind mounted on American P-47 Thunderbolts. If those rounds hit the Messerschmitt, it meant Felix hadn't flown into a storm alone. He'd flown into combat no one knew existed.
Then came the engine analysis. The Daimler-Benz DB605 was frozen solid but stunningly preserved. As they thawed and examined the crankcase, metallurgists discovered catastrophic scoring inside the cylinders. Something had seized the engine mid-flight, but not because of cold. The fractures were sharp, violent, and uneven, consistent with sudden oil starvation. A bullet had likely ruptured an oil line or punctured a tank. The motor had run for maybe 2 minutes before locking up completely, long enough for panic to set in, not long enough for escape. But the most revealing find came from a waterproof pouch hidden behind a warped panel near the pilot's seat. Inside was Felix's flight logbook, pages stiff but intact. Written in tidy handwriting were meticulous entries, altitude changes, wind estimates, reconnaissance notes, everything normal until the final page. Under the date of his last flight, a hurried line was scrawled across the bottom. Unbekanntes Flugzeug, schnell ankommend. Unknown aircraft approaching fast. It was the only line Felix had ever written that deviated from regulation format, his last recorded words. Combined, the evidence painted a picture the military had missed or buried. Felix Hartman had not vanished in a storm. He had been engaged, fired upon, forced into the mountains. His disappearance wasn't bad luck. It was a battle erased by time, sealed in ice, and revealed only when the world was finally ready to see it. With bullet damage confirmed and engine failure established, investigators painstakingly reconstructed Felix's last minutes, step by agonizing step. Once the oil line was ruptured, the DB605 engine would have screamed in protest, its temperature spiking, pistons grinding metal on metal as the propeller slowed. Felix, rigorously trained for emergencies, but trapped in blinding weather, would have been fighting the aircraft as much as the storm. Instrument readings would have become wildly unreliable. Wind shear would have slammed him sideways with brutal force. When the engine seized entirely, he became a glider pilot in a steel coffin, hurtling towards an unforgiving fate. Yet he did not panic. The airframe's final trajectory, meticulously reconstructed through impact marks and crushed metal, strongly suggested a controlled descent. He aimed for the only flat surface available, a treacherous glacier shelf tucked precariously between two colossal granite towers. He nearly made it. The Messerschmitt clipped a jagged rock outcrop, spiraled violently, and slammed nose first into the unyielding ice. But the crash, terrifying as it was, wasn't instantly fatal. That chilling revelation came from a single haunting detail that sent shivers down the spines of the forensic team. Survival gear had been removed from its storage compartment. A flare pistol, its purpose a desperate plea for help, was missing. A thermal blanket, meant to ward off the frigid cold, lay unrolled. And, most profoundly, faint, distorted footprints, softened by centuries of melt, were found trailing away from the wreck, as if he had somehow managed to climb out, injured but miraculously alive, and attempted to find help. A desperate, valiant fight for survival. He lasted long enough to attempt escape. He lasted long enough to hope. 400 meters downhill from the crash site, beneath a churned layer of ice and sediment, searchers found scattered remains and fragments of Luftwaffe-issued fabric. DNA analysis, an undeniable voice from the past, confirmed it was Felix. The position of the remains suggested he had been walking, stumbling, a lone heroic figure battling against the overwhelming forces of nature, attempting to reach the valley before exhaustion or the merciless grip of hypothermia finally claimed him. The mountains did the rest, burying him beneath the relentless snowfall that winter, then encasing him in glacial ice for decades, a frozen monument to his final desperate struggle. His final hours, far from being defined by fear or chaotic despair, were instead a testament to human resilience. An injured pilot, utterly alone in a vast frozen wilderness, refusing to surrender until the very bitter end. What the war had coldly recorded as missing without trace was in truth a final act of survival, a silent epic written into the unforgiving landscape. He hadn't simply fallen from the sky. He had fought his way into the heart of the mountains, and he had fought just as fiercely, just as desperately to get out. Bringing Felix Hartman home was not merely a military procedure. It was the profound closing of a wound that had festered, unhealed, for nearly a century. His remains were carefully flown from the majestic Alps under a quiet, solemn escort, initially wrapped not in grand ceremony, but in deep, reverent respect. The recovery team, hardened experts who had witnessed their share of tragedies, stood in a rare silence as the transport helicopter lifted off, its rotors beating a mournful rhythm against the thin mountain air. Even they, seasoned and stoic, felt the immense weight of this particular recovery.
When the aircraft touched down in Munich, an honor guard, their uniforms crisp and their faces grim, was waiting. The Bundeswehr had meticulously arranged a full repatriation, the kind of ceremony reserved for soldiers long denied their final, rightful recognition. A casket, draped with the proud German flag, was carried with measured, respectful steps across the tarmac, as a lone bugle played a mournful, trembling note that hung heavy in the air. Old men, their backs bent by the weight of decades, who had once worn similar uniforms, stood with hands trembling at their brows, a silent, poignant salute. Some had served with Felix's squadron, sharing a common history of youth and war. Others simply remembered the countless generation that had vanished into the gaping maw of conflict and never returned. Felix's surviving relatives, a collection of distant cousins, grandchildren of his siblings, people who had grown up hearing his name whispered like a cherished family myth, gathered at the ceremony. None of them had ever met him, yet all felt the strange, aching pull of belonging, a profound connection to a life tragically cut short. His portrait, once a fading image in an old farmhouse, was now printed in crisp, vivid detail for a memorial wall, his youthful gaze meeting the eyes of his descendants across the chasm of time. His letters, miraculously recovered from the cockpit pouch, were read aloud by a family member, their hands shaking with emotion, giving voice to a past that had long been silent. His mother and father were long gone, their long wait over, but their greatest, most enduring question had finally been answered. 81 long, silent years, he was no longer a ghost drifting somewhere in the vast, indifferent mountains. He was home, he was remembered, and he was, at last, truly at peace. Even after the solemn ceremonies concluded and Felix's incredible story gently settled into the public consciousness, one haunting question lingered like a persistent shadow cast across the majestic peaks. How many more secrets were the Alps still clutching tightly beneath their ancient ice? His astonishing discovery sent a ripple of profound curiosity and urgency throughout the mountaineering world, prompting researchers to meticulously reevaluate old, forgotten maps, to pore over previously dismissed crash reports, and to investigate long unverified wartime sightings. Since the unprecedented glacier melt had so dramatically exposed his Messerschmitt, experts issued a stark warning. Other wrecks, German, American, British, might also lie in the frigid embrace of the cold, patiently waiting for the ice to retreat just a little farther to reveal their long-held truths. For the first time, the world truly grasped that the mountains, in their silent, majestic indifference, had been meticulously archiving history, layer by layer, for generations. Historians, their work now imbued with a renewed sense of purpose, began tallying the dozens of aircraft still missing in the region, each with its own unanswered, haunting story. Who else had gone down in storm-shrouded passes, their final moments swallowed by the whiteout? Who else had fought desperate battles never recorded in any official log? Who else lay silently beneath the frozen surface, their last moments locked away in a colossal glacial vault that only the capricious hand of nature could ever hope to open? And, more unsettling still, how many families had spent their entire lives waiting for answers that might only emerge when the ice, in its own unpredictable timing, chose to finally give them up? But the most chilling truth wasn't just what the Alps had hidden, it was why they had chosen to reveal it now. Scientists pointed to the unprecedented heat wave of 2025, the alarming rapid shrinking of the glaciers, the newly exposed crevasses that had once been sealed for centuries. Without the rapidly accelerating melt, Felix's aircraft might have remained buried for another 100 years, or perhaps forever. Climate change, a force far more potent and relentless than any human endeavor, had achieved what war, dedicated search teams, and tireless archive researchers never could. It had uncovered the past. Felix's final moments, his desperate descent, his valiant survival attempt, and his lonely, heroic struggle to escape the frozen wilderness had been preserved with an eerie, heartbreaking clarity. Time, that relentless devourer, had not decayed them. Instead, it had protected them, encasing his story in the immutable embrace of ice, as if the mountains themselves understood the immense weight of the narrative they were holding. And when the ice finally split open, cracked apart by the relentless warming, the truth emerged, intact and undeniable. The Alps had guarded his final chapter for 81 years. They had waited for the world to be ready to hear it, and now that it had been told, one unsettling reality remained. The mountains are not done speaking, and somewhere beneath another shrinking glacier, another story is stirring, patiently waiting for the day the ice releases it into the world.